Welcome to Beyond the Power Line Road, a podcast dedicated to bringing lessons, stories, an occasional interview, and hopefully some inspiration to you for your Christian walk. Today, I want to mention before I get started that there's going to be a couple of uncommon words. First one is Areopagus, and Areopagus appears in the Bible in the book of Acts, and it's when Paul is in Athens. And I just want everybody to know that Areopagus is probably very, very common to the individuals along the Mediterranean Sea, but for us, it is something that is not often referred to, and it's the Supreme Tribunal of Athens. So when we get to Areopagus, nothing new or strange there. It's just where Paul was taken when he gave his speech. The next word is a word that is very interesting, and it shows up later on in my lesson, and it is called pseudepigrapha. Let me try that word again, pseudepigrapha. And pseudepigrapha deals with false titles, and you'll see where that ties in before too long. But pseudepigrapha is uh, articles or scripts or scrolls that have been around for centuries that someone has falsely attributed to an author, normally a biblical character, and very often they are not attributed to those biblical characters, and we will get into that. So, with all that, I want to get to Paul, and I want to get to Acts chapter 17. In Acts chapter 17, verse 10. And they took and brought him to Areopagus, saying, May we know what the new doctrine is that you are speak, for we are bringing some strange things to our ear, or for you are bringing some strange things to our ear. Therefore, we want to know what these things mean. For all of Athens and foreigners who were there spent their time in nothing else but either to tell or hear of new things. So Areopagus was a gathering place, if you will, was a gathering place where individuals would speak of prophecies, where they would talk about news, where they would hear of new and inventive concepts. And so Paul was taken there because of the fact that for a week or so he was trying to preach Jesus to the Jews in Athens. And so Paul starts. Then Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus and said, Men of Athens, I perceive that all things you are very religious. So he says again, Men of Athens, I perceive in all things that you are very religious. For as I was passing through and considering the objects of your worship, I even found an altar with the inscription to the unknown God. Therefore, the one whom you worship without knowing, him I proclaim to you. Now, the interesting thing that I like about Paul's commentary here is Paul was not going through Athens and telling people that, you are worshiping wrong. He's not telling the individuals that they are sinning by worshiping false gods. What Paul is doing is staying away from being judgmental, and he is doing his very best to gather the people that he knows needs to hear of the Lord Jesus Christ, and he is addressing them in a manner that is very civil. I'm going to say it one more time. He goes, Men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are very religious. He could have said that in a lot of different ways, but what he did is said it in a way that was not judgmental at all. And if you haven't guessed, the lesson today is on being judgmental. And are we judgmental as Christians? And sometimes we find out that we are, and we don't even realize that we are. I'm going to spend most of my time in the Old Testament today, and there is an issue or a fact, if you will, that I think hangs over a lot of Christians because of the way they perceive the fact may say whether they are being judgmental and interpreting the Bible in an entirely different way than what it should be. So I will be in Genesis, and I will be reading a goodly amount, and forgive me if I slip over a word that is not intended. And I will be reading a whole bunch of names, and some of those names I have time with. So we will get started in Genesis chapter 5. This is the book of the genealogy of Adam. In the day that God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. He created them male and female and blessed them and called them mankind in the day they were created. And Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness after his image, and he named him Seth. After he begat Seth, the days of Adam were 800 years, and he had sons and daughters. So all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Seth lived 105 years and begat Enos. After he begat Enos, Seth lived 807 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. And Enos lived 90 years and begat Cain. And after he begat Cain, Enoch lived 815 years, and he had sons and daughters. So all the days of Enos were 905 years, and he died. Cain lived 70 years and begat Methuselah. And after he begat Methuselah, Canaan lived 840 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Canaan were 910 years, and he died. And Methuselah lived 65 years and begat Jared. And after he begat Jared, Methuselah lived 830 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Methuselah were 895 years, and he died. And Jared lived 162 years and begat Enos. And as he begat Enoch, Jared lived 800 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. And Enoch had lived 65 years and begat Methuselah. And after he begat Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Let's stop here for a second. So what are we looking at? We're looking at the genealogy up to the flood. And all these individuals and all the individuals of the time had much longer lives, and of course the earth was much different then. And I wanted to get to Enoch because Enoch is very important in the lesson, and so is Methuselah. And of course, we can't leave out Noah because he's important there too. But I want to go on with just a slight bit of reading before I get back to where I want to talk about judgment. Methuselah lived 187 years and begat Lamech, and after he begat Lamech, Methuselah lived 782 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. And Lamech lived 182 years and had a son. And he called his name Noah, saying, "This one will comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands because of the ground which the Lord has cursed." And after he begat Noah, Lamech lived 595 years and begat sons and daughters. So all the days of Lamech were 767 years, and he died. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on earth, that every intent of the thoughts of the heart was only evil continually. The Lord was sorry that he had made man on earth. He believed in his heart. So the Lord said, "I will destroy man I have created from the face of earth, both man and beast, creeping things and birds in the air, for I am sorry that I have made him." And Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And of course we know Noah was told to build the ark of gopher wood. Noah was 500 years old at the time. Or was he 600? He was an old man at the time, by all practical thoughts. But let's look back to Enoch, Methuselah, and Lamech. So Enoch was the great grandfather of Noah. Methuselah was the grandfather of Noah. Lamech was Noah's father. Lamech died 5 or 6 years, probably closer to 5 years before the flood. And Methuselah died near the flood. But what did you learn? Did you learn that Methuselah died in the flood? Did you learn that Methuselah died during the flood? Because these prepositions make a big difference, and they are prepositions that can cause a lot of unintended judgment. So what the lesson is what about this? Do we know that his heart and his thoughts were evil so that he washed away the flood? Or did he just die the year of the flood? And so I want to go to one more verse before I get into this talk a little bit more. And of course, this was still in Genesis. And the Lord is talking to Noah. And he says, "Come into the ark, you and all your household, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. You shall take with you 7 days for every clean animal, male and female, and 2 each of the animals that are unclean, male and female. Also 7 each of the birds, male and female, and keep the species alive on the face of all the earth. For after 7 more days I will cause it to rain on the earth 40 days, 40 nights." Now what happens when we start reading the 7s and the 2s, and we ignore this verse 4 of this chapter, which says, "For after 7 more days I will cause it to rain." So why was there the 7 days? Some think, and they could be very correct, some think that it just took 7 days to get everything lined up. But in every verse that I looked at, not every verse, I'm sorry, every Bible translation that I looked at, and I looked at the NIV, I looked at the ESV, I looked at the King James, I looked at the New King James, I looked at the New Literal Translation, I looked at the, and I don't even remember this one, the Common Source Bible, I think is what it was. And every one of these, the 7 days is an important fact. In the NIV, it says 7 days from now. And in the ESV, it says for in 7 days. And the King James says for yet 7 days, then I will cause flood. And the NASB says for after 7 days, I will send rain. So you can kind of get the general idea that this 7 days is something that is significant and something that is important. And do we have the whole idea of what's going on? Now here's a possible thought. There's a thing in the Jewish tradition called a Shiva. And the Shiva offers very specific recommendations for ceremony of a funeral. So the first week after the funeral is known as the Shiva. Literally, the word means 7. During that period, the mourners are treated with utmost care and respect. So could it be that someone died right before Noah went into the ark? There are other indications that 7 days are essential for mourning. Job chapter 2, verse 13 was about how Job was saddened for 7 days. 1 Samuel 31, 11 through 13 is also an indicator of 7 days is associated with mourning. So how does this tie in with the flood? How does it tie in with Methuselah? And how does it tie in with how we perceive the gospel? And what is very interesting is when I grew up, and you may not have been in this situation, but when I grew up, I had understood that Methuselah died in the flood. Catch the preposition in. And yet, when I'm doing research about Methuselah, I begin to question that concept altogether. So Methuselah is a name that has a different meaning, and I would like to read the words to you in completeness, but it's by a gentleman by the name of Jeff Benner. And Jeff Benner talks about the fact that the name Methuselah itself points in the direction of the flood, and his name means after his death shall, or his death sentence. And so it sounds like it's an incomplete sentence, but it's a very interesting incomplete sentence. So if we look at another translation of what Methuselah means, and so we go to the Jones Dictionary of the Old Testament, and these are, I'm sorry, let me say the Jones Dictionary of Old Testament proper names. It has Methuselah, and the definition of Methuselah is when he is dead, it shall be sent. Kind of an interesting definition for a name, isn't it? I mean, who's going to name their child when he is dead, it shall be sent? But that's what Methuselah's name was. And if we go and look at the Hebrew names of Methuselah or Noah and compare them to the English translations, we find a very interesting concept here. In English, Methuselah, of course, his death shall bring, or when he is dead, it shall be sent. And Noah, the name means rest and comfort. And it seems like these two complete or complement one another's sentences. So the grandfather name means when his death, when he is dead, it shall be sent. And what shall be sent? Noah. Because Noah provides the rest and the comfort for the world. Noah has provided the new life, the rescue, if you will, of the animals, of the earth. And so we can look at those names and kind of get, maybe Methuselah. And the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's really interesting with Dead Sea Scrolls. Dead Sea Scrolls, uh, there were books, there are parts of books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Samuel, Ruth, Kings, Micah, Nehemiah, Jeremiah, Joel, and Joshua, and Judges, and Proverbs, and Numbers, and Psalms, and Ezekiel, and Jonah. So a lot of the books of the Bible, a lot of scripture in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Additionally, though, there were testaments of the 12 patriarchs, the book of Enoch, books of giants, the book of Jubilees, etc. What happens is a lot of these books that were found with the Dead Sea Scrolls were pseudepigrapha, pseudepigraphia. Boy, I'm going to have a hard time with this word, aren't I? Let me try it one more time. Pseudepigraphia, which the books of giants, and the book of Enoch were examples of that, because we are almost certain that Enoch did not write these. But what's interesting is we go back and we look at the history of certain writings. Josephus, which was a historian at the time of Jesus, had quoted some of these books, and he had referred to many of the pseudepigraphia as books of history. And even though they weren't necessarily books that were attributed to the right author, they could very well have been historical documents. And we can see this with the book of Enoch, because Jude in the New Testament references Enoch or the Book of Enoch, which is a very interesting concept that the Book of Enoch is the least referenced. Now, I would say there is no way the Book of Enoch is to be considered as inspired, but I can also say I think it is a good history and a history that we can take advantage of and learn. So in the Book of Enoch, in the first book, there is a statement that was allegedly said by Enoch, and like I say, it's been paraphrased and changed and edited, but I think the general concept still remains. And this is chapter 91. It says, "Now, my son Methuselah, call to me all your brothers, and gather together to me all the sons of your father. For the word calls me, and the Spirit is poured out to me, that I may show you everything that will befall you forever. And therefore Methuselah sent and summoned to him all his brothers, and and assembled his relatives. And he spoke to all the children of righteousness." Now, it's Enoch that spoke to all the children of righteousness and said, "Hear, you sons of Enoch, all the words of your father, and hearken, as you should, to the voice of my mouth, for I exhort you, and say to you, beloved." And it goes on. So, is this a historical document? Is Methuselah and his brothers and their families sons of righteousness, but maybe just simply too old to get to the ark? Or maybe simply Noah was simply the only one that God found total favor with. So, do we make speculations on how we sometimes make statements or believe concepts without thoroughly researching them? Was Methuselah a man that died in the flood? Or was Methuselah's prophecy of the upcoming flood, because of the way it was named? Could Methuselah have possibly died a few days before, and again, a warning ceremony before Moses finding that ark and started raining? We don't know, but we do know that we can't say Methuselah died in the flood. We can't say he died in the year of the flood. So how many judgment calls have been in the Bible that are not scripture? I catch myself doing it often that shouldn't we be like Paul when he's speaking to people of Athens? We should be able to discern. We should be able to know that individuals likely Christ, but we should also be able to save them in a manner that is not going to make them feel like we are judging them. We have to be really careful with how we talk about our statements to individuals. So when Paul says, "I perceive that you are a religious people," it was so well thought out what he said, as opposed to Paul telling them, "You're all worshiping false idols." So I will leave you then with this, and this is Romans chapter 12. "I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is the good and acceptable and perfect will of God." The good and acceptable and perfect will of God is to not be judgmental, but it is to be able to go out and seek and save those who are lost. Have a wonderful day.